Brian Juchems and Liz Lusk, and they're going to talk a little bit about themselves and what they do.
Liz, talk about yourself.
Okay. Well, first off, I have to ask a question about UW policy and bathroom situation. Do people here, does anybody know the policy here at the university? Is it that people go to the restroom to which they feel that they are most comfortable? Is that the policy here at UW, or is that unexpressed, or how does that work? Anybody?
Yeah. You can go to the bathroom wherever you'd like.
Okay.
As long
At
as
least that's what we do around
Not the hall.
right, as long as it's officially designated bathroom, like if it was just
Yeah.
But I know we do.
Okay, and that's important to have that as policy. That's an area that the Madison School District is actively working on as we speak, and I think there will be that same policy in place by next fall. At this point, we don't have that policy, but obviously important.
Yeah, the reason that we brought that up is because Audrey mentioned, you know, men's bathrooms and women's bathroom, not saying who should go where and stuff like that, but I'm like, oh, I wonder if there's like strict enforcement or if there's any gender neutral or all gender restrooms here in the Biochem building. Maybe, maybe not. So, does anybody actually hang out in the Biochem building quite frequently here? I didn't think so. All right, so let's make it an investigative report. So, like the next half hour go fine. It'll be awesome. So, cool.
Okay, I can start out who I am. Liz Lusk is my name, and I work for the Madison School District. I'm the GLBTQ, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth resource person. It is the longest title in the school district, not the best paid, but it's the longest title. And I have been a social worker for, oh God, umpteen years. I got I was going to say overgraduate, my graduate degree here at UW, and it was kind of exactly where this building is back in the old days. It was the old social work building. Other people So, and that was, I worked in private nonprofits, domestic abuse, family planning. Then I worked for a while with the county. Amy here, that was fantastic. And then I worked in a small school district, Sauk Prairie School District, for about 15 years, and then I came into Madison, where I worked in the schools as a social worker up until this is my second year in this position. So I also have to tell you I feel warm and fuzzy just being on the spot of the School of Social Work, because I didn't come out until I was in graduate school. It was in graduate school is where I met my partner now, and in social work school. So I can say about that, I always feel happy coming here.
Oh, there's power in
we
this.
have grandkids, it's all very happy.
Well, I'm just Brian. So my name is Brian J, and I work with the Gay Straight Alliance for Safe Schools, Madison-based organization that does educator training, GSA support, and student leadership development across the state. And when I say GSA, I mean Gay Straight Alliance, which are student-based clubs in high schools. I'm not a social worker, so I'm just along for entertainment today. That was supposed to be funny. Oh wow. Okay, so it's Friday, we're waking up. Good. Most importantly, Brody, can you hear us? Are you getting?
I can, yeah.
Okay, good. He's apparently taping us, so hopefully I don't say anything wildly inappropriate today. But anyway, right. So I'm not a social worker, but I've been working with gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth in one way or another since about 1992. I've been in Madison since 90. So I got my undergrad, not my overgrad, at Luther College in Iowa, which is a small nonprofit, or not nonprofit, small. I can't think of the word. Private. That's the word. So small private, like all Lutheran, all white, all Norwegian. So I've learned how to say ooh, oofta and stuff like that. So oh geez. Anyway. So I started there, and I started working in higher education administration, but then I found out that there was really good things happening in Wisconsin around gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth. And so I decided to quit my job and move to Wisconsin, started volunteering with what was then known as GLSEN South Central Wisconsin, which eventually became Gay Straight Alliance for Safe Schools, or GSAFE. So I've been volunteering with them for since '98. I've been on staff since 2002 as kind of the lead trainer. And I'm actually at the end of like a month-long run of training, so this is my very last one in about a 4-week period. And so I'm tired and I'm a little bit punchy, so hopefully everybody's a little. Is anybody else out there tired and a little bit punchy today? Oh, good. Oh, good. We're gonna mix it up. It's gonna be great. So good. So hopefully that makes sense. I should say that if you have how many people here have seen Liz and I before train or do?
Yikes.
So, okay, wait. So hold your hands high if you've already seen part of this. Okay, so not too many, good. For you, there's going to be a little bit of review, but on your evaluations, what we want you to write is, some of this was review, but it was really helpful for us to review it. So, all right, so, but actually we worked really hard to make sure it's a different workshop, although maybe the first 10 minutes is going to be a little bit of review. And I think because there's enough new people that we will show that video clip that you might have seen before, so hang tight. Now I forgot where I was going. Should we just jump in? Oh, I talk fast, so if I'm going too fast, is there somebody that would be my volunteer that will? Good, so, and don't be gentle about it. Be like, Brian J., slow down. Good, excellent, so that's all I've got.
Will she be our break person too?
Oh, right, so no, you're not our break person. So we want to take a break. Do we want to say just, let's see if it's 9:15 now, and how long does this go, Audrey?
Till noon.
So let's do a break at, should we do 10:15? 10:15 and see where it's at. So can we have a person that's going to remind us to take a break if we have forgotten to take a break? So Audrey, not you, it has to be one of the people, like, yeah. So thank you, good. So I can be firm and solid about it. So I will say that if we're in mid-sentence, we won't stop, but we'll wrap up really quickly. So, all right? So, good. Liz, is there anything else?
Nope, not that I can do.
All right, so I have to do a shameless plug. Just so you know, I have to. So in case you're interested, my organization is collaborating with a couple of other organizations to do a state superintendent's conference on LGBT youth. It's going to be at the end of this month, March 29th at the UW-Milwaukee.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be great.
Are people here familiar with the work of Dorothy Espelage? Somewhat? Okay. She's done a lot of work based on Dade County Youth Survey data. I'm sorry, Brian J. But she's going to speak on the impact of that GLBTQ bullying has on youth. And she's a really powerful speaker, as well as Jeffrey. I'm not remembering Jeffrey.
Sure. So Jeffrey. So our two keynotes. One is Dorothy Espelage, and the other person is Jeffrey Winder, who's coming in from California's GSA network, and he's particularly looking at issues of racial and economic justice as it relates to LGBT youth in the school and community system. So he'll be looking at the school to prison pipeline insofar as how it impacts LGBT youth and LGBT youth of color, and looking at some racial and economic justice issues. So we're really excited to have him come in as well. So plus it'll be fun. So anyway, so that's my plug. So all right, so this is the repeat part for people who have seen this before. Liz, do you want me to fly these? So,
yeah, we can go back for it. That's good.
All right, cool. So for folks that have already seen these, just remember that this is review. So when we're talking about gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth, there's three pieces of identity that I think are really important to talk about. And my guess is that some of you have seen something like this in different ways or before. So this is kind of this is what Liz and I use just kind of as a really quick, simple way to talk about pieces of identity with folks who haven't had a lot of chance to talk about it. So if you've done a lot of like gender theory or something like that, you're probably going to find these to be insufficient. And so I encourage you to share that as you wish. So all right, so the first thing is just simply biological sex. And when I talk about biological sex, I'm talking about chromosomes, I'm talking about hormones, and I'm talking about anatomy or the junk between your legs, or your sexy parts, or whatever you call it. So genitals, all that other fun stuff. So what we know is that generally we think of people as being either biologically male or biologically female, and that's it, that's cut and dried, and that's it. But what we know through science and research and just people's lived experiences is that actually at the hormonal and chromosomal level, there's quite a wide range of variety as far as like our biological makeup. And then also, moving up towards anatomy, what we know is that about 1 in 1,000 births, when the child is born, the doctor usually looks between the legs and say, oh, it's a boy or a girl if they haven't already figured that out already. But in about 1 in 1,000 births, there's often a chance that the child's going to be born and the doctor's going to be like, I'm not sure what this child is, either because of the ambiguous genitalia or some other biological differences where they're not quite sure what biological sex that child is. The term for that used to be hermaphrodite, but a more appropriate term and a more affirming term that's being used by people with this condition is the term intersex. So if you've seen that term and if you're not familiar with it, that's what we're talking about there. So cool. The important thing to remember is that we all have biological sex. So regardless of where we fall on the spectrum, we all have biological sex. So, and then based on biological sex, we start to make some assumptions about who that child is going to be, what they're going to be interested in, what clothing they're going to wear, etc. So, for instance, right now, I have a lot of people who are having their first round of babies, so it's like baby explosion time in Brian Jay's world. So, and I'm like, knock it off already, man. It's like, gifts get expensive. So, anyway, just wait. If you haven't had friends getting married in mass waves or you're having babies in mass waves, it happens, right, Liz?
Yeah, it sure does.
Oh my gosh. So, anyway, so, where was I going? Oh, so right now a lot of people are having babies, when usually when somebody says I'm pregnant, what's usually the first response that besides congratulations, what's the first question that people ask?
Boy or girl?
Is it a boy or girl? Right. And why are they asking that question?
They understand who they are.
So what's that?
So they understand who, like, what kind of child that will be.
What do you mean by that? Tell me more.
Yeah, it's good.
Like,
That's deep. I like it.
what kind of color of baby clothes you give them, and what is their life going to be like, and how is that parent going to parent them?
Right. So usually, and I love that it's going that deep and stuff like that. Usually people just want to know what color onesie am I going to buy them, or do I get them a doll, or do I get them a fire truck, or whatever it is that people are playing with. So we start to think about who that child's going to be, and we even start thinking off into the future as far as they're going to get married someday, or how they're going to be as a person. So so based on biological sex, we start making some assumptions about who that child's going to be, what they're interested in, et cetera, et cetera. So we start to apply some gender roles to that child. So and of course, gender roles are societal expectations of gender. Expectations for men and women here in the Midwest might be a little bit different than expectations for men and women on the East Coast, West Coast, South. Or in different countries, or different areas, or different sub-communities. So like each culture, each community has certain expectations around gender, and those do vary from place to place. But if I were to draw a box on the board and say, all right, what are some stereotypes about boys? What are some stereotypes about girls as far as how they're supposed to act and what they're interested in, etc.? We could easily come up with really consistent lists because we've all been taught those from an early age. Am I going on too long about this?
Not at all. No, I think I really think that all these things are pretty core.
Yeah.
So I think it really does matter.
Cool. So I just want to say, hey Xavier, so good to see you. So it's like, wait, I recognize somebody in the audience. So good. So I see you everywhere now. So it's like you're our workshop group. All right. So good. Anyway, so I say that with love. So okay, good. And I haven't emailed you. I said I was going to email you. And I haven't done it. So and that was months ago. Mea culpa. Anyway, all right. So gender roles. So we have those expectations as far as how males and females are supposed to act. So. Then we have gender expression, which is how you present your gender or how you wear your gender. So again, like if somebody were to walk through the door right now, what are the things that we would notice or look for to try to figure out what gender that person is? Like what would we try to look up? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so can somebody shout out some answers? What's that? Clothes. What do you mean by clothes? Right. So the types of clothes, and like, is it traditionally masculine or male clothing, or traditionally feminine, or clothing associated with females? What else?
Hairstyle.
Hairstyle. So how it's cut, the length of it, how much, how little of it is, where it's at on the body, like if it's on the face, how much, how little. So if it's on the body, etc. And then makeup. So if they're wearing makeup, we have some assumptions about who would be wearing makeup. What else do we look at or pay attention to? Breasts. So breasts and curves and stuff like that. Right.
Physical.
Right, like the body, like where things curves or don't curve and stuff. Right. So what else? I'm glad that somebody said breasts in the audience. So that's good. So, right. We now we said it. At some point we might be able to say penis or something like that, and stuff like that. So not that those are matchups and stuff like that, but I'm just saying those words that people get uncomfortable about saying. So other things that people might pay attention to is how a person walks, how a person talks, the tone of their voice. I know that sometimes, even though I know that I don't want to try to, like, I've been so trained to try to figure out what gender a person is, so that it's like I'll try to pay attention to the Adam's apple, even though it's like, I'm like, wait, who cares? But I've been trained to try to figure it out if I don't know what gender a person is. So anyway, so that's gender expression. And so, on one end, we kind of have this concept of what's considered masculine appearance and behavior, what's considered feminine, then there's also androgyny.
I have to apologize. I'm kind of random.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of another one that I just got in the mail for about gender expression.
Yeah.
So of course I mentioned my grandchildren, sick, but
Oh.
true. So I got this one from their other grandparent, and it was a photo of the 5-year-old granddaughter, and she is helping out with cooking, and the picture is her like this with an apron on. I didn't even know how to, so this was 5 years old, right? Now I thought if Izzy, the 10-year-old, had been helping cook, would this have been what I saw in the picture that I got from them? So it's so ingrained, starting so early.
Right.
Just these different kind of
And
expressions.
that 5-year-old probably didn't come out of the womb going like this.
No,
So-
and she doesn't do that. I've never seen her do that.
Right.
But still,
So she
it's
learns
just
something
the
somewhere,
layers
so.
of that start so early.
Yep, so that's gender expression, which is often taught. I mean, there's obviously some people fit into these roles,
Yep.
and some people fit into these expectations, and that's fine and comfortable. But the reality is, like, a lot of this is taught. A lot of this is placed upon people based on their bodies. So, and then finally we have gender identity, which is that psychological sense of self, which, in other words, it's when you close your eyes, how do you see yourself, or how do you feel about yourself? So, for instance, like this morning, actually I took a shower last night, so I was going to say I took a shower this morning, but so last night when I took a shower, so, gross, right? Anyway, so last night when I took a shower, it's like, I got out of the shower, and I could see that I was biologically female when I got out of the shower and saw myself in the mirror. Nobody else needs to think about that, but that's just what it is. So and then, so I know that I'm biologically male, and then also when I think about myself, whether I close my eyes or just kind of drifting off, like I feel male, I think about myself as male, so that feels pretty connected. So my biological sex and my sense of gender identity feels connected. So a term for that, for folks that aren't familiar with it, so when a person's biological sex and their gender identity match up, or pretty much in alignment, a term for that is usually, the term is cisgender, spelled C-I-S gender, C-I-S-G-E-N-D-E-R, which is basically, and it evolved out of the transgender community, recognizing that what we used to say is transgender people are people who aren't transgender, which feels like a really weird way to set that difference up. So cisgender is a term, because oftentimes we'll say a straight ally to the gay community or the LGBT community, and I would say it's like straight and cisgender allies to the LGBT community. So, so I'm trying to work that word much more into my vocabulary. When people say straight allies, I'm like, oh, straight and cisgender allies. So if that happens to apply to them. Anyway, that was an aside. So, so then of course, if one word that might apply to a person whose biological sex and their sense of gender identity doesn't match up might be transgender. I think that, oh, I put that in the wrong place. So I don't know if we can talk about this.
We can jump.
Do you want to talk about
Okay.
this? I don't know
Well,
if you can read that.
Can you see that very well back there? And I just saw somebody who was here from the school social work group. I had to bring this. A student gave this to me this week, and I just loved it. It was so helpful because when you're talking about all these different pieces of gender and different layers, it's complicated. So the student gave this to me, and I love it. Can you see it says, so there's, it's a planet. So, and it says that in general, most people, you tend to be born in either Ladyland or Manlandia. You see the different colors on here? I just love this thing. And it's where they stay, where they live their whole lives. Some people, though, are citizens of the other planet. As we get older, we may move to a place where we feel more comfortable. And some of these are harder to see. So these are the big what do you call them?
Continent.
Continents, thank you.
It's Friday.
This is the sea of gender nonconformity. Here's gender fluid, little boat going here. These are smaller islands, new islands that are often discovered, like third gender island, gender diverse island.
Gender neutral island down there at the bottom.
Yeah, gender neutral island, yeah. I like the fjords of femininity. Somebody kind of got a little over the top with this one, but so, and it shows transgender as anyone who lives outside their expected gender land. So I asked this student, oh, and then this is really important. Some gender lands have more resources and power than other gender lands. That's really critical. Then finally, I was asking the students, so where are you on this map? I don't get it. See this little orbiting satellite there is agender. And so that satellite kind of revolves around the whole of the planet.
Cool.
Yeah, I thought it was a really nice way. Pretty soon we're going to have to do this in 3 dimensions and do like little scarf dances or something about it. You have to, it's hard because it's complex.
I'd love to see you do a scarf dance.
Yeah, that's coming up next time.
Brian and Liz next time, scarf dancing. So, Audrey, you didn't hear us make that promise, did you? So, all right. So that's gender, some pieces of gender, and of course there's more to it than that, but those are kind of the 3 that we find most helpful when we're talking with general audiences about these pieces of identity. And of course, everybody has gender. Everybody has gender identity. Whether it's like claiming it or saying I have agender or something like that, it's like we're all impacted by that. So, and then finally we have sexuality, which is the 3 that I talked about. One is just sexual orientation, which in other words is just simply who are you attracted to. So are you primarily attracted to people of the same sex? Are you attracted to people of either the opposite or another sex? Because of course the term opposite sex implies that there's only 2 sexes. What we know from our first slide is that there's greater variety than 2. But the language that we often use is terms like opposite or other. I mean opposite or either this or that. So, and when you're working with clients, recognizing that there's more variety than just one or the other can be really helpful as far as being accessible to them and being open to them. And then we also have people who either, like a term might be bisexual, which is the capacity to be attracted to a person of more, 1 or more sexes. Other terms that young people that we work with use. For a while, people were using person-specific. Some people will use pansexual. There's other words that people use as well. And then I have asexual on there, not because I feel like it fits in the middle between same-sex and opposite sex, but to recognize that for some folks, they don't have romantic or they don't have sexual attractions. And so it's more like considered a line going off of the spectrum kind of in a different direction. So, so to recognize that as a valid identity as well. Then we have sexual expression, which is not necessarily what you do in bed, because I don't really want to know what you do in bed. So, but it's the who you do it with. So that might be same sex, might be both or more than one sex, not necessarily at the same time, and then also with opposite or other sex. And then finally, we have sexual identity, which is self-identification. And there's actually about 4 different pieces of self-identification that I talk about in some presentations. I'm just going to talk about 2 here. One is who you tell yourself that you are. In other words, you know, in your quiet, private moments, who do you say you are? Do you consider yourself heterosexual or straight, bisexual or something in that area, gay, lesbian, queer, something else? So it's that self-identification. So, and then there's also what you disclose to other people or what you tell other people that you are. So, and the important thing about this, and I'm sure people have thought about this already, is that just because a person identifies as heterosexual or straight, doesn't mean that they're not having same-sex experience or sexual experience with people other than somebody of the opposite or other sex. And they might actually have primarily romantic attractions with people of the same sex, but yet identify as heterosexual. And conversely, just because someone identifies as gay or lesbian, doesn't mean that they're not engaging in opposite sex or other sex sexual behavior. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, good. So.
And we really came around that on getting the Dane County Youth Survey that we do for all kids, because they finally started asking about behavior, not about identity. So, because those 2 pieces were so very, very different, of course. But I mean, it took a while to get that. So the Dane County Youth Survey looks at student behavior, not necessarily what that identity looks like yet. Interesting.
And I want to acknowledge that with these, yeah. So.
I have a question about pansexual.
Yep. Let's see if I can give a good response.
Okay, only because I was trying to figure it out. I have a friend who was pansexual, but she said she had relations with all different people, so trans, bisexual, asexual, just anybody. Not anybody, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hopefully she's like, oh, I still.
Yeah, like, you know, whoever she likes, but it doesn't matter what their sexual orientation is.
So sexual orientation.
Would that be different than bisexual though? Because I just had to like also know that.
Well, and if you go looking for a solid definition of pansexual, you're going to find a lot of different definitions and stuff like that. So usually the folks that I work with that use pansexual as a self-identifier, and feel free if there's people who want to add to the definition and stuff like that, is that if you think back to the fact that there's more than 2 biological sexes, or there's a variety there people identify, recognizing that it's much broader than just 2 and stuff like that. So it has that kind of capacity to fall in love or be attracted to a wide range of people based on biological sex, as well as gender identity and gender expression. So kind of looking at both biology as well as how a person identifies as far, or feels as far as gender, or presents as far as gender. Does that kind of make sense? Or you can say, okay, so that was not the smoothest definition in the world. So
It was pretty.
but it's a complex way of thinking about identity. So and that's a great question. So. The thing what I want to acknowledge about these 3 slides and just the way that it's presented is that they're represented as a spectrum where there's like one end or another end. And like usually, and I forgot to bring this slide, include this slide this time, but lately what I've been doing is like instead of having 2 ends, actually wrap it around into a circle. So there's kind of a continuous cycle of identity or circle of identity. So that so there's not like, because when you have 2 ends, what that indicates is that there's like one end or the other are kind of the standards and then everything else in between. But if you create a circle, then everything is kind of just okay and normal and acceptable. So we're just kind of normally occurring. So some are more, what's the right word? So some occur more often. Or,
Right.
Right.
More prevalent or whatever.
So like, does anybody remember as a kid having that rocket stack where it's like you have that little thing where you like put little circles, rings stacking up and stuff like that? Does that kind of register for some people? I forgot to bring that with me too, so this is what happens.
He left his toys at home.
I left my toys at home, so it's not that kind of workshop. Anyway, so, if you think about that, like if you remember that rocket stack thing where like little kids gnaw on those little colored plastic rings, if you think about all these different spectrums as those rings, and recognize that within each ring there's an infinite number of possibilities as far as how a person might feel or identify, and then the fact that they can twist and turn and line up and stuff like that, what it really lets you remember, or what it reminds us of, is that there's an infinite variety of, within even these 3 pieces of identity, there's an infinite variety as far as how that might manifest in each person. So each client or in each person that you're going to work with is going to be different and have really complex identities. So.
And I also like, Ryan Jake has a slide that shows that it's also not as if wherever you are on the stacking rock thing it's also nested inside a larger social context, so that some of those are much more privileged places to be. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but it's important, I think, to say.
Yep, cool. So, all right, so I want to talk about so that's pieces of identity. Then also just, I'm sure folks have studied models of identity development. This is just a really basic kind of amalgamation. Is that the right word? So where you take different models and put them together and kind of say, here's kind of some general trends. So this is a model for gay sexual identification development, and there is some variation based on like lesbian identity development, bisexual, transgender identity development, but we feel like in the whole, just for a quick training, that these are pretty common across a number of different identities. So
and people throw out if you think there are pieces that should be in here that aren't.
So when we think about identity development, so the first piece is, well actually I should ask you, so how old were you when you had your first crush? So this is an important, it could have been yesterday, it could have been like, right when you were born, but I need 5 people to be brave enough to tell me how old you were when you had that first crush, when you were like, oh, I want to spend time with that person. So yeah, over here.
6.
6, great. Do you remember the name?
Joey.
Oh, Joey. So, are you friends on Facebook?
No.
Okay, all right. So 6, great. So I also saw your hand too.
Elementary school, I don't know exactly.
Could you ballpark it a date?
Probably whatever your kindergarten is.
So let's say 5. So 5, 6, great. Back here.
5.
5. So 5, 5, 6. Yep.
That was really 16.
16. Excellent. So good. So 5, 5, 6, 16. I want to hear from one other person over here.
4.
4. Oh, do you remember the name? Oh, probably not. What's that? Oh, you know what happened. So. I like it was probably like, oh, you shared the juice box or something like that. So. Oh, nice house together. So all right. So awesome. I'm gonna put the parental filters on here. So all right. So 4, 5, 5, 6, and 16. So anybody here good at math? I'm not. Anybody here okay at math? Okay, so if we're looking for the median, not the median or the average, but the median. 4, 5,
6, isn't it?
5. No, 4, 5, 6, 6. No, 4, 5, 5, 6, 16. The median would be 5. It's one in the middle. So like if we line it up 4. Yeah, so this is a very unscientific research.
Y'all are early learners.
Right, you are. Let me say, this is like this. Social work learners. definitely have crushes.
They're more in touch with their crushes.
Like I was going to say, the two things that I would observe from this, one, social workers, like, on a whole, crush out a little bit earlier than most of my audiences. So not that there's not an acceptable range,
it's okay.
So it's all good. And of course, crushes at age 5 look different than crushes at age 10, 16, 25, 50, etc. So, but the other thing that I would say is that based on this unscientific survey, the first age of coming out for this group, the median age of coming out for this group would be age 5. And of course, so this group, if I were to apply this, the median age of being aware of your sexual orientation, and of course that doesn't mean like mechanics and sexy time and stuff like that, but just knowing who you want to spend time with, or having even that before you even could put words to it, who you wanted to be around or kind of get excited to be around age 5. So that's kind of that pre-sexuality stage where it's like, like for LGBT people, it's that early awareness of not only maybe being attracted to somebody, but just that awareness of being slightly different than maybe some of your straight and cisgender peers. And if you talk to some older folks, they'll say, well, I knew at an early age that there was something different about me, or I felt different. I couldn't quite explain what it was, but I just sensed it. And so that's kind of talking about that pre-sexuality stage. Then we move on to that identity questioning, which includes could I be gay, I may be gay, we're lesbian, bisexual, transgender. At that point, as they're starting to question that, that might lead to periods or instances of repression and avoidance, particularly if there's negative images or negative messages or negative beliefs about being that identity, either in the family, in the community, within oneself. What we know is that also denial can lead to, this is a point where, particularly if a person's in the questioning stage, and we didn't really share this term, but questioning is just simply that I don't know what my sexual orientation or my gender identity is. What we know is, from some research says that if a person receives harassment, is a target of harassment and bullying at that particular stage, that questioning stage, they're at much greater risk for depression and suicide than a person who's already kind of said, yep, I'm gay, or yep, I'm trans, or yep, I'm straight. So that's a particularly vulnerable moment for a young person who might be going through this process. So next slide is, and can you click twice?
Brian, I have a thought.
Yeah.
Is it really denial that will put a person potentially into suicide or depression? Or is it acknowledging that this is who I am and knowing that outside people are not accepting me for who I am?
Sure, and I bet it could be both. So, and I don't know if the research digs down deeper than that, stuff like that. So, but yeah, so it's complicated, right? So, yeah, for some people it's the, oh crap, this is who I am, and I have a lot of shit that I'm gonna have to deal with because people have really negative attitudes around it, or I don't feel like I'm gonna be accepted. And so that can be like, I'm not, either right now or until I can be in a safe community, I'm not gonna be gay. And that might be, suddenly you become the person who calls somebody else a fag, or you become the person that I'm going to prove that I'm straight because by either getting pregnant or getting somebody else pregnant. Those can be some strategies that people use to kind of be defensive. And then for other people really struggling with it, this is like, I can't be that, I feel really bad about that, and just kind of some really deeply held beliefs or fears about that could also lead to those depressions. So, but I haven't dug down, I'd have to dig deeper into the research. So my answer is yes. I suspect yes and both anymore. So.
And just because in our context, it's not like it's okay wherever you are. It's okay. I have a slide, I don't have it on here today, of a picture, and I grew up in New Mexico, and I have a picture of this that I'd seen for years, a very old, turn-of-the-century photograph of a Navajo person. And I looked at it later and saw that this is a transgender person. This is a very unusual looking, more. It's not a standard. God, I'm really all over myself here. At any rate, had dug a little bit deeper, and this person's name is Yahweh, and had been a person who in the Navajo culture, because of being two-spirited, was someone who was valued and set to negotiate with the larger government of the U.S. when they were going through all that. So that was a valued role. So in that society, depending, so it is about the context. It is that the thing that is said is that if that is your choice, then that's something that's going to cause pain to you or somebody around you. So that part is really true. But the feelings, it's a bad time when you're in that questioning state.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep.
Other questions or? All right, so next you come to the coming out stage, which depending on what type of response that you get, and if you are working with young people, this might be the stage where they start asking you questions such as like, hey, did you watch Ellen? Or it's like, hey, what do you think of that Glee plot? So, which I've stopped watching Glee, so I'm assuming that they still do gay things, or LGBT things on Glee. So it's a little bit over the top for me. So plus, like all the characters are morally reprehensible usually, and they portray women in bad lights in that show. Anyway, so sorry I just moralized about it. Sorry, I'm going to stop editorializing about Glee. It's your delight here.
You used to like it. It's harder. And they let you down.
Right, they let me down on the first episode. Anyway, so this is the point where you might get people asking you kind of indirect questions or trying to probing you as far as like what your opinions are about gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender issues. So, and that they might not follow up with being like, if you respond in an affirmative way, they might not follow up with oh, I'm gay, or I have a sibling who's gay. That's kind of your chance to lay some seeds, letting them know that you're a supportive person when they ask that. So at this, especially as they start to come out either to themselves or to other people, like trying to find where they fit in the community, and particularly, I think about a young person up in Superior that I worked with a couple of years ago who was talking about after he came out, he's like, the only thing that I knew about what it was like to be gay was watching Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and that's how gay men are supposed to act. And so he's like, so I tried to swish, I tried to act all like, hey, and stuff like that, which for some people that's normal and natural, but for him he's like, oh, it was awful, it didn't feel right, it didn't feel like who I was. But that's how I thought it meant to be as a gay man. That was that was talking with me about that experience. And eventually got to the point where it's like, oh wait, I just get to be myself. So, and so if that fit for him, great, but it didn't fit for him, and that wasn't natural for him, and so you tried to figure out, so then he became more of a lumberjack type guy. So, all right, so anyway, so which is great, the swishy lumberjack, I love it. So anyway, so that's really gender bending, I love it. So anyway, and then with positive coming out experiences eases transition and like kind of builds some momentum where people are like, I'm going to come out to everybody, which, Liz, if you click on the next, so then you come out to the pride stage, which is awesome, and it can also be the most insufferable time in the lives of people who are working with this gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender youth, because everything is bye, love day, oh, and not like, what was that, bye. Backstreet Boys, right? Was that? Or NSYNC, I'm sorry, right. Sorry, dude, I messed up my boy band. So, all right. So, wait, who was here that helped me? So was that, oh, I like how you're like, not me, it was her, so nice. So anyway, so it's when everything they talk about, everything they write about, everything they research about is about that. So, and it might seem really insufferable, it might be tiring as an adult working with that person if you're working with a young person when they're in that stage. But the thing I want you to remember is, one, it's developmentally appropriate, because two, when that child at age 5, based on the median of this group, and when that child at age 5 said, the girl said, I'm going to marry Angelina Jolie when I get older. So, so like if it's a little girl saying I'm going to marry Brad Pitt when I get older, what's usually the response from adults? Oh, right. If it's a little girl that says, I'm going to marry Angelina Jolie when I get older, what's some common responses? Right. So just even listening to the tone of people's voices demonstrates a message that a child gets at a really young age. So what happens is that they don't stop having those feelings. Or if they're like at age 5 saying, you know what, a young girl says, you know what, I don't think I'm a girl, I'm a boy. And people say, you can't be a boy, and stuff like that. So what happens is that those feelings don't go away. They continue to have those feelings and those thoughts, but what happens is that they've learned at a very early age to hide something that's very important about themselves. And so what happens is that they're just kind of sitting here on this while their straight and cisgender peers get to kind of go through some natural identity development pieces. So when they come to that point where they finally get to be open about who they are, it's kind of like, I love it, I'm out, and stuff like that. But you're like, okay, you're one person pride person, great. But it's normal, it's developmentally normal. What you can do is try to help them eventually they have to try to figure out how to navigate some of the social, if they're not good at picking up on the social cues from their peers or their families, that they're like, all right, we get it, we love you, but that's enough. So trying to navigate some of those social cues with them. So.
And to help families understand this too.
Yep.
Mom was calling and said, why does she have to be so gay? She's the gay, you know, she has to do it all the time, 24/7. So it's helpful for her to know that it's not always going to be like this. It's not like this.
Because it too will pass. Because the next stage is just identity and integration, if you can click in. So, which is just simply where it's like moves from being like it's all about this piece of identity to being like this is one piece of the larger identity of who I am. Unless you're like Liz and me and we're paid professional gays. So we're not paid to be gays. That's a whole other thing. Right. So we're professional gays. So we do give autographs. Yes, I saw
him. With young people, when, well, even as you get a little older, but you know, when you're a child and for a girl, if you're playing with boys, you know, or maybe for a boy, if you're playing with girls, you know, some people may think of that as you're heterosexual, you know, because you're playing with these opposite sex children. Yeah. And yet at the same time, you know, as a child, you might not really have that like sexual attraction to them. So that's another distinction is to when you're watching children play, you know, to know that it's not necessarily sexual attraction.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, you know, I can play with this person.
Yep. This is who I feel comfortable with. This is kind of right. And not to presume any sexual attraction.
Yeah.
I was a little bit older, but I remember being in middle school, and getting roped into playing spin the bottle with a lot of my female friends. And when the word got out, everybody's like, "Ooh, Brian, you're a stud," and stuff like that. And I'm like, I want to be like, "Oh my God, that was the worst experience of my life." It's like I wish my boyfriend, my guy friends were there, but it's like it was with my female friends. So it's like I had a brief repetition as a stud. So which if you look at me now, you're like. Anyway,
Wait, before you go on just a second, I just want to say that I think I do a lot of work in elementary buildings and young elementary buildings, and I think it's really important, though, that we also use language to lay out the possibility that it might mean that they are gay, so that you're inclusive when you're talking about play opportunities, that it could be with two moms or it doesn't, and that you have to be explicit about that because other places the kids aren't going to get it. So if you don't, it's up to you to be more inclusive of that. So it's not necessarily anything that has to do with their sexuality or gender or anything else, but it's helpful to them to let them know that it is okay, because they aren't going to be getting that message other places. So there are no such thing as boy games in our classroom. We have games that everybody can play with, depending on their interest. There are no, so-and-so wears what they like, and that's what it's really important that they're explicit with kids on that.
I saw a hand.
Yeah, right behind.
Yeah, I don't really, a little confused about your previous slide. Like, sorry to go backtrack, but you're saying like, you know, people are so gay 24/7. Like for me, it's like people are straight 24/7. Like you're making like this deal like, I don't know, it feels really pressing like what you were saying previously. Like, why is it not okay for them to, if they want to be all out and like saying like as a training tool, like I don't, you know, like how people might get sick of it, but why are they getting sick of it? Shouldn't like people like take that in and be like, if you want to be gay and be, you know, that, or like mothers calling in like, they're so gay all the time. Well, guess what? They are gay. You know, like it's just, I don't know, I feel like that was kind of, you know.
Putting down, I could just give you a hug for that question. No, really, it's true.
You know, like why, I don't understand.
I think that it's just to sort of see it in perspective, that is a bigger part of your life, at different stages, especially during that coming out stage. I mean, I know that I did not have one friend who, and I didn't come out till later, who I just had to be around gay people all the time. I just needed it.
But and what's the problem with that?
There's
You're
no
saying
problem.
As a profession,
there's
in the field, like.
So just so you know, the context that I was sharing that I probably wasn't, is that sometimes when you're working with people, they're like, why are they this all the time and stuff like that. And the point is to recognize, well, yes, it's like, why not?
So,
you could counter, it's like, well, are you straight all the time?
Yeah.
Are you cisgender all the time? And that might, you're right, that could create some learning. It's trying to help the people that are kind of like, my child is this, and suddenly there's this explosion. You would hope that they're at that point where they're like, yes, but you meet people where they're at, not where you want them to be. And so recognizing that, it's like, so when they're kind of like, you know, why is my child suddenly a one-person pride parade? It's like, one, you can be like, isn't that great? And then two, it's developmentally appropriate because they haven't had a chance to explore this piece of their identity for the last several years. So,
Okay.
So
But like when you're talking about in the profession, when you guys are saying
sure.
you meet like people at this stage, like, and that, I don't know, it seems like, maybe I'm not understanding like
Sure.
what you're trying to say, but it seems to me that you're saying like this stage kind of gets, you know, you get tired of it, but why would you, I don't understand, maybe I'm just like, I just love everybody, but yeah.
Let's Xavier deal with that.
So I think what they were actually referring to is like teenagers around the time that they first come out go through this stage where everything they wear is a rainbow and all they talk about is being gay, and they just like are really excited about being gay and everything they do has to do with them being gay.
Yeah, but what's wrong with that?
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but in healthy development, people don't obsess about one part of their identity.
Okay, maybe that.
Thank you, Xavier.
Yeah, that's
So-
Yeah.
really well.
Nice. I'm going to remember that line. Healthy development. People don't obsess about one, except for a period of time. It's like, especially if it's something they haven't had a chance to work on. So yeah, I think it's great. I love it. Although, and because I work professionally with you, sometimes like, all right, enough already and stuff like that. Even though cognitively I know that it's normal and stuff like that, it's just kind of that you get exhausted sometimes. Like sometimes, not all the time. So,
Okay.
so yeah. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's recognizing that people can get exhausted by it, and two, it is because they've not had the chance to really work on that. They're kind of doing an immersion where they're obsessing about it. Like I think
So
about
how
some
do you
adults
help
that come out later in life.
So how do you help
It seems
them?
like they're going through an old. They're going through adolescence again. So yeah.
So how do you help them then? I mean, if
You understand it, really.
okay, to use
You
a
know that
Xavier's
that's
term,
what-
I'm just like if we're going to help them along the continuum.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
how
and
do
it's
we help
not
them?
because they're good. Yeah, it's not something to discourage. Although what might happen is that you'll have either classmates or parents getting frustrated with
Yeah.
it, and so and this is just me thinking. I'd love to hear some other thoughts. Two things that you might want to think about is again working with that young person or that person to recognize that. They might be getting some pushback or recognizing some social cues when people are kind of like, okay, I'm done talking about this. And then you also work with those classmates or those parents, helping them recognize that it's something that they have to be doing right now because they need to be working on that piece of identity. So, cool.
I was thinking about the parent or teacher, whoever who is getting upset with this person obsessing about their identity, whether it's heterosexual or gay. I'm thinking, isn't there really maybe a safety factor in there that the adult is kind of looking at, you need to repress some of that sexual identity, whether it's heterosexual or gay, to some extent, I mean, when teenage girls are just coming out as being heterosexual, it's like they wanna flaunt it with every guy they see, and that's not necessarily safe. So I think for adults looking at this display of sexual pride, it could be a safety.
I would hope that it isn't a safety thing. I would try to make sure that that any safety issues are dealt with, and I wouldn't like discourage it because I do think pride is important.
Yeah.
It does remind me of what you're saying about I worked 10 years at a middle school, and I think, oh my God, this heterosexual. And there's always going to the dance used to exhaust me sometimes. So that's a part of development for everybody. This is just has a little bit more of a spotlight on it because of that layer of repression. Lots of hands. Okay,
Talking about that, I don't think we really. Maybe we just haven't reached that point in our society where we, with the heterosexual focus, we don't tell people, that's too much.
Yeah.
I don't hear that. And I think we have to come to a point in our society of more acceptance-based because I think, once again, I feel it's great that, especially in adolescence, where we're all trying to identify, no matter what you are, that's a very huge period in our cognitive development where no matter what sports, anything, we're all trying to fit in, find these labels. In Western society, that's what it is. It's disgusting sometimes with identifying the label things, but we all try to identify in different ways. And I think we just need, to become at a point in our society where it's just acceptance more.
Yeah.
I was thinking, the pride part of it, it makes sense to me because when you feel uncomfortable about something, a lot of times you kind of overcompensate in the other way to try to prove even to yourself that this is right and this is good. And then I think the next step is really important because then that's the time when you're comfortable with yourself, and you can be gay, but then you can be a teacher or a scientist or something else, and it doesn't have to all be about the pride of it, you know? It's just that's who you are and you're comfortable, and then you can be anything else you want to be too.
You can take on those other identities.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, when that whole coming out piece, it felt so good.
Yeah.
I mean, it just feels so good, you want to share it.
Yeah.
This is so exciting, this is so great. So part of it's, you know, and then you go back to your regular life, and, you know, and you have these other multiple identities. And, yeah. Yes, you had one.
Oh.
I was gonna say, I feel like with the safety, I wouldn't think of like sexual behavior and risk that way, but I would think like, I think back to my mom and her reaction to me just saying like, I don't know, if I thought a girl was cute, I'd go out with her, it wouldn't make any difference to me. And her reaction, one, I think socially, like, that's not good at all. And her like innate sense of like, it's fine for other people to be gay, but not for you. And so, and I don't know, but I feel like also there is that, beyond just that feeling of like uncomfortableness, there is that safety concern because of all the, media attention on different events that happen. And it's not always safe to disclose. It's why you look for social cues to say whether you are gay or straight or bi, whatever.
Yep.
And I'm trying to figure out why I had such a reaction to that when it was said before. And I think partially it's sort of like what used to be said to women a lot of times is it's not safe, so you shouldn't necessarily go out at night because it's a safety concern, we want to take care of you. And really, the safety, and I agree with you, it isn't always safe, but so that means that we work with the environment to create a safe environment.
Feels like parents though, I mean just for the parent
Parents,
aspect of that, like I can see how parents would take that to another level, even though there are plenty of safe places to say it, but they're still overly concerned because it's how parents are.
And that's something we want to work with a little bit about how you can do that as a parent in a way that's acceptable and not assaulting.
So let's go here, and I'm being mindful of time
Yeah.
too, so this is good. So, but we're still on the review part that we were
Yeah.
only thinking about. So just saying, so, right?
I'm only asking, I want to ask this question to tie back to the pridefulness. What do you do when the child is prideful? And this is good, and I know I've experienced this not even a week ago, and the child has disclosed like, hey, I'm this way, and I'm excited about it, but now everybody has shut them down. What do you do with that? Because now, like, it's like, I support you, but now everybody else does not. You're happy and excited about it, but nobody else around you is not. Now this child would like to move away. And I'm like, well, you can't move away, because if you move away, we're going to do the same thing. So how do you deal with it?
Can we throw that question back to the audience?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
So sure. So let me see if I recap that, paraphrase you. So so she was just working with a student just very recently who has done the I've come out, I've shared it with everybody, really excited and really in that pride space. And you've been supportive and stuff like that. But everybody else around that child has kind of shut them down or pushed them away. So all the students around that shut that student down or pushed them away to the point where that student is now feeling sad about it. So sad in the process.
Parents, has the kid been out to parents? And is that a negative as well, or how is that?
So it's negative peer response.
Yippee, because that's a key in terms of mental, physical, emotional health of that kid. Okay. But how do people deal with that? What age? 14.
Oh, so teenagers.
Wow.
I don't know exactly how to deal with it, but what I suspect is that some of those kids are just uncomfortable because it might be, they're just uncomfortable, but it forces them to look at themselves too.
Right. So there might be you might be dealing with other students' uncomfortabilities. So I saw other hands. So
I was going to ask, do you know if the students are actually uncomfortable with the fact that they've come out, or like the pride aspect of it?
Not sure. Yep, not sure. So yep.
Is this high school? I mean, is there a GSAFE at the school?
14.
It's GSAFE high school.
GSAFE, sorry.
Yeah, and of course not all.
I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Yeah, not all LGBT students go to the GSA, and sometimes just like any other group, they can be kind of cliquey, or have be a friend group, and so not everybody that comes into GSA, just because you're like T and come into GSA, people are like, we love you. So, but it's a good strategy. But right. So, because there are student-led clubs that aspire to high ideals and don't always. So they can be really awesome, and sometimes they're not always the place where people are embraced. But it's a good idea. So what you're asking about, is there a support network in school that they can possibly tap into? Sorry, I didn't mean to like shut that down, but sometimes, yeah. So cool, yes.
I always found that activities like the coming out star or like spectrums, things like that work really well because it puts it in perspective and makes it really personal for people.
The coming out star, I don't know that
I don't know what
activity.
that is.
So you have a star and you write different things on each of the points.
Yep.
So like your dreams, friends,
Yep.
aspirations, families, things like that.
Yep.
And then each person has a different color star, and based off of the colors, so as you quote unquote like come out, as you're experiencing like what other people might experience, you rip away certain parts of it, so you can learn kind of what it feels like.
So maybe doing that activity with the people that might be pushing
and
the
I feel like that
child.
really personalizes it for a lot of people, and it helps them kind of understand what everyone else is going through, whatever stage they're at.
Cool.
And I think that whole like curriculum piece is very important. Again, if you judge, when you come in, they come in with just all the stuff that comes from our culture, which isn't very supportive. So it's really incumbent on people in schools and other settings to really work against those stereotypes. Yeah, what do you say?
I'm gonna jump the shark here because I kind of have to go to another meeting and that.
Go Excel.
All right, so here's my question. We're talking about family, we're talking about support, how do you help African American people, young people who come out where we know in our community that mental health and homosexuality are so frowned upon? How do we assist that? How do we?
That's really tough, and I have to tell you, I'm working with a kid right now, 7th grader, who is scared, is out, and someone at school, and I'll just tell you the story, since coming out, had been in a lot of problems for his behavior, and because he was so frustrated, and then once he started talking about this, hasn't had those behavioral problems at school, but is really scared at home because he would be sent away. So I think those are real concerns, and creating a safe environment for kids is important. A lot of it depends on the age of the kid, because that 7th grader can't do the same things that a 14-year-old can access. But I also would say that there are exceptions in our community. There are places in our community where kids who are older can access support. We just, 2 weeks ago, there was a Youth of Color Summit that was sponsored by Mom Kids and
Freedom Inc.
Freedom Inc.
So, yeah, I mean, another thought, there's some resources, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit, but the two that might be particularly helpful in that situation. There's the Family Acceptance Project from California that looks at what accepting and rejecting behaviors look like, regardless of the families. And they looked at Latino families and white families. They did work with African American studies due to the limits of their funding and stuff like that. And their research was Latino and white, and so they looked at some of those behaviors, and we'll talk about it a little bit. And then also out of Milwaukee, Diverse and Resilient is working on a project called the Acceptance Journeys. And what they did is they did a community readiness assessment, particularly looking at African American families and African American community in Milwaukee, trying to figure out how do we start educating and how do we start building culturally resonant or culturally competent messages about what does acceptance look like and examples of acceptance. And so if you go to Diverse and Resilient and search for acceptance journeys, and I don't have that in the slides.
I didn't bring it in. It's beautiful.
But what's great is that found allies within the community to start sharing their stories of acceptance of their LGBT family members and sharing those stories, both printed, orally, as well as like signs and buses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the approach was, let's educate the community and start educating the community about what acceptance looks like. So,
do you have other suggestions?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think when it comes to dealing with specific cultures, I think that's when it's most important for organizations or people that are teaching these classes or educating people, for there to be people of color in the front, teaching those things, being very secure about who they are, and you know, because I look around the room and I mean, you know, we see the lack of diversity even in this room, and so it's very important, you know, for even more people, and it's great, you know, you guys are standing up there and educating, very comfortable with yourselves, great. But when it comes to, you know, your question about African Americans, I mean, you know, that's going to be a whole cultural thing that, you know, you're going to have to go through. But the more African American, Latino, Asian, you know, I'm glad Freedom Inc. is doing all that. That's a great organization. But the more people of color we see comfortable with themselves, with their sexuality, I think, you know, you break through some barriers in that way. Yep. The other comment I had was about you and the teenager you're dealing with right now. I mean, you know, I think we can work on as much education, and I really like coming to these trainings because, you know, you come out with so many resources. But I think we all need to be, you know, realistic and know that not everybody's going to be accepting. Yep. There's so much intolerance out there. You know, for people of color, it's even worse because you have a double whammy. So, I mean, you know, also just letting people know, you know, you can, again, you can do as much education as you can, get those friends, you know, blah, 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 do this with parents, but the fact of the matter is, there's going to be, you know, you're not going to be accepted everywhere. Right. Yeah. You're not going to be accepted, and just saying that, and being okay with that, you know, you have a group of people that support you, it's important to stay around them. The fact of the matter is, you know, you're not going to find that everywhere.
Right. So, and when that happens, help them with some tools.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the National Children's Hospital that works particularly with gender-variant and gender non-conforming youth. One of the things that they recommend for parents working who have gender non-conforming or possibly transgender children is actually help them recognize that it's like they're gonna, like, life isn't gonna be as easy, like life is gonna be challenging and not everybody's gonna be supportive and stuff like that. So developing some skills around that to try to figure out how do I stay self-resilient as well as how do I be a self-advocate. So, yep.
And I would also just like to say that I really appreciate that question, Excel, and I really think that's a place where we have lots of work to do. And so I think people in our communities of color in Madison, if there's any way to support that work, that's where a lot of it really, we do have to have that happen. We do need to acknowledge that there's just lots of work to be done.
I wanted to add another idea that I used, and that's the idea of restorative circles. So helping the student identify one or two people that they really want in their lives, and that they think that would be somewhat safe to be able to have that, and then approaching those other students with that one student's permission, and having that circle where it gets to the personal, because that's what it is. And so making it very personal in that setting. And I've had some success with it. But the other thing too is it really highlights our role in facilitating protective behaviors. I hear you. I know this is important to you. Can we plan how you're going to come out? Right. And who
Thank you.
Because with that impulsive brain,
right. That's the thing with middle schoolers.
Yeah, just and balancing that. So.
I agree with all that you're saying there, but I would caution. It's really interesting in the district. I've been I've worked a lot with the anti-harassment work that's going on. And people's first thing that they want to do when they're done is to work with, helping kids stand up, like helping kids be more assertive and all that sort of thing. And I think it's also incumbent on us to, and the same goes with the restorative circles generally, or in circles, the restorative circles are usually done when there's been some problem, and that can be very powerful. I've done those. I love those. Yes. We've used them a lot.
It's specific.
Yes, in specific situations. But the circle that has to happen first is in the morning circle that's just happening if people are in schools. They're happening in a lot of different places. In morning circle, you deal with the issues. You can't just bring it in when it's a problem. It has to be a part of how you do work every single day. So one of the curriculum pieces that we're working with, and this is an elementary one, is called Welcoming Schools. And it just is really specific. It's a part of social emotional learning standards that are now in place. So it's like kids need to learn about different communities, including the GLBT community. And then, because a lot of it, I'm maybe giving too much slack, but some of it is just sheer ignorance on people's part. So we have to set that up first. I would be a little reluctant to do it just as reaction, although we have.
So
When
you
you
had,
were talking about morning
oh,
cir-
oh, there was a hand out here, so I would honor that. So.
I guess I'm just kind of playing with a different idea, changing the argument, you know,
Yeah.
from GLBTQ, and we keep adding more groups and divisions to person-specific. I mean, you know, if someone is gay, that doesn't mean they're attracted to all boys and all men. I mean, I'm straight, I'm attracted to only one man. So why, I mean, I guess I don't understand why do we make a big deal out of it when it's, I don't see it as a big deal. Just being gay or lesbian doesn't mean you're an alien or from a different planet. You're still, you know, we're all person specific. So I guess my argument is instead of finding more labels and dividing the community more, why don't we just use the argument as come together and we're all person specific. So straight and gay and lesbian we're all together.
Well, and other people, I'm sure, have responses on this. That would be lovely, but I have to say, as a person who's come out over the years, I mean, I still have no rights to the kids that I raised. I knew people who lost their children when they came out as gay. I know people, you know, I couldn't have had employment at my old school district. I would have had no right to employment. So I think it's important. We can't just say, oh, we're there. We want to be here where it doesn't matter and everybody's okay. But it doesn't acknowledge where we are right now. And if we don't use, by standing up, it means that more people will have the freedom to do that. So that's why I think it's really important to use the words, because we're not there yet. And it's used in a hateful, repressive way to many people.
A nugget of what you said that I want to apply to your question about the 14-year-old peer group is if you have a chance to work with that peer group, it's like, is that question, it's like, so are you attracted to every, you know, kind of start to ask some questions, so, because it's like making that connection, you know, you can start, you know, if you have access to that peer group, I don't know, so, but asking, it's like, you know, if you have that chance of conversation, if they start either introducing the topic or, you know, it comes up, but, you know, start asking those questions. Are you attracted to everybody that you meet? It's like, you know, what's the worst that can happen? Or it's like, when people are attracted to you, is that a compliment and stuff like that? And, but then it's like, so why, you know, just asking those why questions. It's like, well, what does that mean? And probably what you're going to get is either misunderstandings about what it means to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or some deeper prejudice or whatever else happens. You can do some work around that. Doesn't mean that you're going to change their mind, because not everybody's going to like you. And like, yeah, now I feel like I'm rambling. So sorry. So.
It's like we're so close to our break.
I know, right?
Take one,
I think we should.
go?
So, did you have a comment?
Yeah, well, no, well, it's just a kind of clarification for myself. I'm not a teacher, and we're talking about morning circles.
Oh.
Were you talking about M-O-R-N-I-N-G?
No, I should have been. No, sorry. Yeah, it's just.
Liz using jargon.
Yeah, it's a particular way that there are different schools use a time that everybody just kind of gets to check in. They have some form to them, and there's different activities you do. But it's sort of like when students come together, then there's a time to just check in about how they're doing, what they're doing at an activity. So putting some in there, and during that time, that's what I meant. No, people not grieving or anything. Yeah, good question. I'm sorry.
So because we're really close, we're going to, do you want to remind us that break time is coming up here?
Yeah, we have 3 minutes till our break.
Great. I love it. Good. So what's that?
And did she have one more? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I do have a question. I'm working with a 14-year-old who's in the questioning stage, and she does go to GSA. I won't really talk about what they discuss in there.
Sure.
So I don't know what she's
Probably Justin Bieber. So, oh, probably not anymore. Probably Hunger Games or something like that. So, right.
I don't know. But anyway, so if she needed something more, and I were to give her a phone number, would I give her outreach, or what's there for her and what's there for her parents?
Sure. So, great question. So, and we do have some local research sheets that we brought with us. At that stage, well, one, I would be affirming to her, which I'm sure you're already doing, that it's like there's no rush to try to figure out. It can be really frustrating not to know, but there's no rush to come up with an identity or say this is who I am. So, and just to be open to that, that it takes time, and that it might change, or her understanding of it might change. And two, here in Madison, if you talk about a student in the Madison area, in addition to her GSA, which she's going to, probably the age-appropriate places to go to, one would be Teens Like Us, which is kind of an all-community LGBT support social group out of Youth Services of Southern Wisconsin. And I think we have a sheet that has that information, so that's one. So it's kind of a drop-in social support group, depending on how that student identifies, like particularly if the student's like either Black, African American, Hmong, or Latino. There's also at Freedom Inc. there's Plus, which is people like us, which has subgroups. One working particularly with Black or African American youth, another for Asian students. Then we also have Alianza Latina, which is for Latino youth here in the community. So there's options. We have a sheet that has those options and stuff like that. For the parents, there's PPLA, which is Parents, Friends, and Families, Lesbians and Gays, as well as, depending on the child, there's Liz facilitates a transparent group, which is for children or parents of transgender and non-conforming youth, and I think many other parents. I know that Alianza Latino also works with adults in the Latina community, and so does support with them as well. So there's a few in town. So yeah.
Thank you. I have a pragmatic question, and then we'll need to take a break. Do we get access to the PowerPoint?
Yes. So yeah. So because I've been busy training, this PowerPoint was pulled together, like finalized late last night, and I didn't have time to make copies. So what I can do is I can pass. Well, Audrey, what would be the easiest mechanical thing to do? Would it be to pass around and ask people to sign up with their email?
Actually, out on the table is the sign-in sheet. So if you haven't signed in yet, just go ahead and put your name, and there's a spot for your email address. And then what we can do is just email everybody all the handouts electronically, and Brian and Liz's.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize. Usually, at least I like to have some copies of the PowerPoint. So because everybody's learning style is different, and some people really like to have it in front of them as we're going along. So I apologize for that. I've discovered the limits of my ability to do a certain number of trainings. So, all right, so cool.